The door in the face technique. This is a psychological tactic where a person first makes a deliberately large request, anticipating it will be turned down. After this expected rejection, they follow up with a much smaller request, one that the other person is far more likely to agree to. The power of this technique comes from the stark contrast between the two requests. The initial one feels extreme and unreasonable, while the second feels much more modest and acceptable in comparison. This method works because of the psychological principle known as reciprocity. When someone turns down the first request, they often feel a subtle obligation to meet in the middle by agreeing to the smaller request. You'll often see this approach used in sales, negotiations, and general persuasion. A classic example can be seen in sales. A salesperson might begin by offering a very expensive product, knowing the customer will probably say no. Once the rejection occurs, they then present a more affordable option, which suddenly feels like a better deal when compared to the initial offer. Charities also use this strategy. They might first ask for a sizable donation, say $500, expecting the person to decline. Then they follow up with a much smaller ask, such as $20. In that moment, the $20 feels like a manageable contribution, and the individual is more likely to donate, feeling like they're helping without outright saying no. But this technique isn't just confined to business or fundraising. In everyday life, people use it too. For instance, a teenager might ask their parents for an expensive gift, already knowing it will be declined. Then they suggest a less expensive alternative, which is more likely to be accepted because it seems much more reasonable by comparison. In workplace negotiations, an employee might request a 20% raise, expecting it to be rejected. Afterward, they propose a 10% raise, which feels far more acceptable and might even be granted. What's really happening here is that the second offer benefits from the contrast. It appears fairer and more balanced. The underlying reason this strategy is so powerful comes down to the psychological discomfort we feel when we reject someone outright. As social beings, we naturally want to maintain good relationships and avoid conflict. So, when we turn someone down, we often feel inclined to offer some form of compromise. That's why the second, smaller request, especially if it was the true goal all along, has a higher chance of being accepted. However, like many psychological tools, this method can be used unethically in manipulative or toxic relationships. For example, someone might use this tactic to gain control. A controlling partner might start by forbidding their significant other from going out at all. Later, they compromise by allowing them to go out, but only under very strict conditions. On the surface, it seems like a middle ground, but the end result is still control. It just feels less harsh when compared to the original, more extreme restriction. To protect yourself from being manipulated this way, it's important to be aware of how the setup works. If a request seems unusually excessive or obviously unrealistic, there's a chance it's not sincere. It may be a calculated move designed to make a follow-up request appear more acceptable. Recognizing this psychological setup gives you the power to pause and truly evaluate whether the second request is fair, or if you're simply being nudged into agreement through contrast. That said, the door in the face technique isn't inherently unethical. It can actually be used for positive outcomes. For example, a teacher might initially ask students to complete a large, demanding project. Once students push back, the teacher scales it down to a smaller, more manageable task. In this case, the students are more willing to participate. Similarly, charities and nonprofits often use this strategy to boost donations while still ensuring people contribute at some level. Understanding and mastering this technique can make you a more effective persuader and negotiator. At the same time, being aware of how it works helps you avoid being subtly manipulated into choices you wouldn't normally make. It's a psychological dance between rejection and agreement, and those who understand how to lead that dance often gain the upper hand in both personal and professional situations. Pacing and leading. Pacing and leading is a psychological technique often used for manipulation, where an individual begins by matching the emotions, behaviors, or thoughts of their target, and then gradually steers them toward a specific result. The method works by establishing a sense of familiarity and trust, helping the target feel seen, understood, and at ease, making them more susceptible to being gently guided toward a particular belief, action, or decision. What makes this technique so powerful is that people are instinctively drawn to those who mirror their emotional state and personal experiences. When someone senses that another person truly understands them, they become far more open to taking advice or accepting direction. Manipulators take advantage of this instinct by first syncing with the target's emotional state, communication style, or concerns, and then subtly redirecting the interaction to achieve their own objectives. This method is frequently seen in sales and negotiations. For instance, a skilled salesperson might begin by validating the customer's hesitation, saying something like, "I completely understand why you'd want to think about this. Big decisions deserve time." This mirrors the customer's mindset, creating a connection. Once this trust is built, they lead with a line like, "That's exactly why most of our clients take advantage of this limited time offer." It gives them peace of mind while locking in the best deal. Because the customer feels heard and validated, they are more inclined to agree. In group dynamics and social persuasion, pacing and leading is often employed to sway opinions. A manipulative influencer or leader may start by echoing the emotions, frustrations, or language of their audience with statements like, "I know how frustrating it is when politicians ignore us." This helps them appear relatable and trustworthy. After building rapport, they shift into leading mode by saying something like, "That's why we must unite and support this movement." By matching their followers' emotions first, their directive feels organic instead of forceful. This tactic also shows up in relationships, both for building genuine closeness and for manipulative control. A controlling partner might initially mirror their significant other's interests, daily habits, or emotional challenges, saying things like, "I feel the same way. Trust is everything in a relationship." Once a strong emotional bond is formed, they may begin leading with new expectations such as, "Since we trust each other so much, let's not keep passwords on our phones." The partner, feeling emotionally safe from the earlier pacing, may comply without realizing they are being subtly drawn into a dynamic of control. Pacing and leading is also a common element in therapy, hypnosis, and various influence techniques. A hypnotist, for example, might begin by stating indisputable facts like, "You're sitting comfortably in this chair, breathing naturally." These true statements help create subconscious agreement. Then, once the subject is in sync, the hypnotist introduces suggestions like, "And as you continue to relax, you might begin to feel lighter, as if you're floating." Since the earlier statements were clearly true, the mind is more likely to accept the following suggestions as well. In business and leadership environments, this approach is often used to gain buy-in from employees. A manager might begin by acknowledging their team's struggles. "I know this project is demanding, and everyone's feeling the pressure." This establishes connection and empathy. Then, they lead by adding, "That's why we all need to push through together in the coming weeks." The transition from aligning with the team's concerns to directing their effort feels seamless, making pushback less likely. Although pacing and leading isn't always harmful and can indeed be used to positively influence or support someone through challenges, it's a tool that can easily be misused for manipulation. To protect yourself from being influenced in this way, be mindful of situations where someone begins to mirror your tone, emotions, or behavior, and then begins steering the interaction toward a particular conclusion. Pause and ask yourself, am I truly making this choice independently, or is someone subtly guiding me? If the other person's agreement or empathy feels calculated instead of sincere, take a moment to reevaluate the situation before allowing them to influence your decision. The silent treatment is a psychological strategy that thrives in environments filled with secrecy, insecurity, and competition. Whether it's being used in romantic relationships, the workplace, or within families, its purpose is to divide and control. Once you start to recognize the pattern, you reclaim your ability to see the manipulation for what it is and refuse to engage in the game. At its core, the silent treatment is a deliberate psychological manipulation tactic where one individual intentionally ignores or withholds communication from another person to gain control, inflict punishment, or coerce compliance. It stands as one of the most passive-aggressive forms of emotional manipulation, designed to create anxiety, insecurity, and submission in its target. Instead of resolving conflict directly, the manipulator uses silence as a weapon, creating an emotional void that leaves the other person feeling confused, desperate for resolution, and often willing to do whatever it takes to reestablish communication. Although it might initially appear to be an immature or petty reaction, the silent treatment is actually a potent and calculated psychological tool. It preys on a deep human need for connection and acknowledgement. When attention is suddenly withdrawn, it creates an emotional disruption, much like the withdrawal symptoms from addiction. The brain interprets this lack of communication as social rejection, which can lead to overwhelming feelings of self-doubt, guilt, and desperation. As the silence stretches on, the target becomes increasingly consumed with trying to resolve the situation, often compromising their own self-worth just to bring back communication. This tactic is especially prevalent in toxic relationships, whether romantic, familial, or professional. In romantic partnerships, for instance, one person might go silent after an argument, not to process their feelings, but to induce guilt and pressure the other into apologizing or conforming. This emotional distancing can leave the other partner constantly on edge, worried about provoking yet another silent episode. Within families, parents may use the silent treatment to control children, implying that love or attention is conditional upon obedience. In the workplace, a manipulative boss or coworker might deliberately ignore someone, making them feel isolated, excluded, or professionally undervalued. The psychological impact of the silent treatment can be profound. Research shows that social rejection activates the same areas of the brain as physical pain. Being ignored by someone who matters to us can feel like a direct assault on our sense of self. It often leads to heightened stress, anxiety, lower self-esteem, and in some cases, symptoms of depression. People who are repeatedly subjected to this behavior may begin to fear expressing themselves altogether, choosing compliance and self-silencing over confrontation, just to avoid being emotionally shut out again. It's crucial to distinguish between the silent treatment and healthy silence. In healthy relationships, silence can be a space for emotional regulation or time to cool off, intended to avoid saying something in the heat of the moment. The key difference lies in the intent. Healthy silence is rooted in self-reflection, Manipulative silence is rooted in control. When someone uses silence to make you feel abandoned, guilty, or uncertain, they are likely using it as a weapon. The best response is to recognize the behavior for what it is. Emotional manipulation. Do not mistake it as a reflection of your value. If someone is purposely ignoring you to stir anxiety or guilt, resist the urge to chase their approval. Instead, establish firm boundaries. Let them know clearly that emotional withdrawal is not an acceptable way to communicate. If they persist, it may be necessary to remove yourself from the dynamic and place your energy into relationships or environments where respectful, open communication is upheld. Understanding the silent treatment is the first step to breaking free from its psychological hold. The moment you stop reacting, you remove its power. Silence only serves as a tool for control if you allow it to. When you stop seeking validation from the person withholding it, their influence over you begins to disappear. False consensus effect. The false consensus effect is a psychological manipulation tactic in which someone convinces you that a particular opinion, behavior, or decision is widely accepted, even when it might not be. This method takes advantage of the natural human inclination to believe that others think the way we do, thereby generating social pressure to conform. The intent behind this manipulation is to make the target feel like an outsider if they disagree, which increases the likelihood of compliance or self-doubt. At its foundation, the false consensus effect is effective because the brain craves social validation. People are inherently driven to fit in, and when they're led to believe that everyone thinks or behaves a certain way, they are more likely to follow the crowd, even if it conflicts with their own values or beliefs. This psychological effect is heavily utilized across various domains: sales, politics, social groups, and relationships, because it influences behavior without requiring direct force or persuasion. One of the most widespread uses of the false consensus effect is found in advertising and marketing. Brands often use statements like 9 out of 10 people prefer this product, or millions of customers can't be wrong, to make their product seem like the clear, popular choice, even when such claims lack concrete data. The resulting psychological pressure to conform nudges consumers toward purchase decisions. Similarly, social media influencers often say things like, "Everyone is talking about this," or "People are obsessed with this trend," to manufacture a sense of mass approval, encouraging followers to hop on the bandwagon. In political and social movements, the false consensus effect is used to shape public perception. A manipulative leader might assert, "The vast majority of people support this policy," even when it's untrue. By painting dissenters as isolated outliers, the tactic discourages them from speaking up. Media outlets may also perpetuate this effect by selectively showcasing views that support a particular narrative while ignoring or minimizing dissenting opinions. Over time, this can create the illusion that one viewpoint is dominant, making people reluctant to challenge it. This tactic is also common in workplaces and group settings. A manipulative boss might say, "Everyone here agrees we need to work extra hours to meet this deadline," thereby pressuring employees to conform, even if most people actually disagree. Likewise, a team leader may declare, "We've all decided to go with this plan," implying that any dissent would disrupt the group's unity. By framing an idea as the default or consensus choice, individuals are made to feel socially isolated if they speak out against it. In personal relationships, the false consensus effect can be a tool for control. A manipulative partner might claim, "All my exes thought I was the best partner they ever had," or "Everyone would agree that you're overreacting." These statements make the other person question their own emotions and instincts, increasing their likelihood of accepting the manipulator's version of reality. Similarly, in friendships, someone might say, everyone thinks you're being selfish, when in truth, they are the only one with that opinion. Even scammers and fraudsters rely on this effect. A con artist might say, most people in your position invest in this opportunity, trying to make the target feel foolish for hesitating. Multi-level marketing MLM schemes often promote the idea that thousands of people are making money with this, creating an illusion of mass success, despite the fact that most participants are actually losing money. To protect yourself from the false consensus effect, always take time to verify claims of widespread agreement. Ask yourself, who exactly is everyone? Do I have solid, independent evidence that this is true? When someone makes sweeping statements like, everyone thinks this, or no one disagrees with me, challenge them to provide proof. If they can't, it's likely they are using manipulation to push you toward conformity. Trust your own judgment and seek out diverse opinions before making any important decision. Understanding the false consensus effect empowers you to resist artificial social pressure. Just because something is presented as a popular belief doesn't mean it actually is. By questioning claims that rely on vague collective approval, you retain your ability to think independently and make choices rooted in reality rather than manipulation. Mirror effect. The mirror effect is one of the most powerful yet subtle psychological techniques used to influence others and build rapport. At its foundation, it involves the subtle imitation of another person's body language, speech patterns, or emotional state in a way that makes them feel more connected to you. Humans naturally gravitate toward what feels familiar, and when someone reflects our behaviors, we subconsciously read it as a sign of trustworthiness and similarity. That's what makes the mirror effect such a powerful tool in persuasion, manipulation, and social influence. The effectiveness of this technique stems from how we're wired evolutionarily. From early childhood, human beings are naturally inclined to mimic others as a means of connection and learning. This is why babies copy their parents' facial expressions, why friends unknowingly pick up each other's mannerisms, and why romantic partners often start adopting each other's habits over time. Our brains contain mirror neurons, which activate when we observe the actions of others. These neurons allow us to feel what others feel and to relate to them on a deeper, more emotional level. When mirroring is used intentionally, it can greatly shape how others perceive you, making them more inclined to trust you, agree with you, and even comply with your requests. One of the most common forms of mirroring appears in body language. For example, if someone leans forward during a conversation, you subtly lean forward too. If they cross their legs, you do the same shortly after. If they gesture with their hands while speaking, you incorporate similar gestures into your reply. The key to successful mirroring is subtlety. When the mimicry is too obvious, it feels forced or artificial and can have the opposite effect. But when done with finesse, it creates a natural rhythm and makes the other person feel truly understood, even if they can't quite explain why. The mirror effect goes beyond just physical gestures. It also includes speech patterns. If someone speaks slowly and deliberately, matching your own speaking pace to theirs can make them feel more at ease. If they use casual or formal language, mirroring that tone can build instant familiarity. Even echoing some of their words or phrases helps forge an unconscious connection. Another important element of the mirror effect is emotional mirroring. People instinctively feel closer to those who reflect their emotional state. When someone shares something exciting, responding with similar enthusiasm validates their experience and deepens the bond. If they're upset or sad, matching their tone, rather than immediately trying to change the mood, can make them feel heard and supported. This technique is widely used in therapy, negotiations, and sales to earn trust and guide conversations in a desired direction. It's also heavily relied on in persuasion and influence, often going unnoticed. Sales professionals, political figures, and leaders often master mirroring to help their audience feel connected and receptive. In social settings, mirroring accelerates closeness, making it valuable for networking, dating, and resolving conflicts. It's even used in high-stakes negotiations, where subtly mirroring the other party's posture or way of speaking can soften their stance and establish unspoken alignment. But there's also a darker side. Manipulators and con artists often use mirroring to build a false sense of connection. They reflect interests, emotions, and opinions to create the illusion that they truly understand their target, only to use that trust for personal gain later. The best defense against this kind of deception is awareness. If someone mirrors you too quickly or too perfectly, it might be a red flag. If they seem to adjust their personality dramatically based on who they're talking to, they could be using mirroring as a tool for manipulation. When used ethically, however, the mirror effect is an incredible way to deepen relationships, leave a strong first impression, and influence others in a natural and positive way. When applied with subtlety, it builds effortless rapport and makes interactions flow more smoothly, whether in personal relationships or professional environments. Understanding how and when to mirror others can make you more persuasive, more likable, and more in control of social dynamics. Triangulation. Triangulation is a psychological manipulation tactic in which someone brings a third party into a conflict or interaction in order to gain control, create division, or boost their own influence. Rather than addressing an issue directly, the manipulator enlists another person, sometimes subtly, other times openly, to shift the dynamics of the situation. This technique is frequently seen in toxic relationships, dysfunctional workplaces, and manipulative social environments. At its core, triangulation works by avoiding direct confrontation. Instead of resolving a disagreement with the person involved, the manipulator brings in someone else to back them up, stir jealousy, or tip the balance of power in their favor. The addition of a third party complicates the emotional landscape, making it harder for the target to defend themselves or recognize the true source of manipulation. One of the most recognizable forms of triangulation shows up in romantic relationships. A manipulative partner might introduce someone else, perhaps an ex, a coworker, or even a made-up admirer, to create feelings of insecurity and competition. They may say things like, "You never compliment me like Sarah does," or "My ex always understood me better." These kinds of remarks plant seeds of doubt, causing the target to feel they must work harder to preserve the relationship. The ultimate aim is to create emotional unease, keeping the partner off balance and craving validation. Triangulation is also a go-to strategy in toxic work environments. A manager might pit employees against one another by saying things like, "John always stays late to finish his work. Maybe you should take your job more seriously." This kind of manipulation fosters rivalry and mistrust, making employees unsure of where they stand. In doing so, the manipulator secures their control over the group. Gossip, too, often serves as a form of triangulation, where selective bits of information are passed around to influence how individuals perceive each other. In family settings, triangulation can be especially damaging. A parent might favor one child while putting another down, saying things like, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" This tactic not only creates division between siblings, but also cements the manipulator's authority. Over time, such dynamics can leave deep psychological wounds. sowing resentment, and preventing the growth of healthy relationships. Triangulation is effective because it fosters confusion and emotional instability. When individuals don't have a clear sense of where they stand in a relationship, they become more vulnerable to manipulation. The person at the center of the triangulation controls how information is presented and how conflicts are interpreted. Rather than dealing with issues head on, they manipulate the emotions of those involved, steering them based on incomplete or skewed perspectives. The best defense against triangulation is direct, honest communication. If someone tries to manipulate you by inserting a third party into a disagreement, resist engaging indirectly. Confront the person directly and insist on handling the issue without outside interference. If someone tries to make you jealous or insecure by bringing up another individual, recognize it as emotional manipulation, not a true reflection of your worth. Establishing strong boundaries is critical when dealing with someone who uses triangulation. Identifying this tactic early on can help you avoid unnecessary emotional turmoil. If someone is constantly playing people against one another or engaging in mind games to stay in control, it's a clear sign of toxic behavior, and it's not something you should tolerate. The most effective way to dismantle triangulation is by stepping away from the manipulative dynamic altogether and committing only to open, honest, and direct communication.